So how many people have heard of the Transfiguration in Sunday school and in church? This is Transfiguration Sunday. How many people know what happened on Transfiguration Sunday? And how many understand it? If you didn't have your hand up, as far as understanding it anyway, if you didn't have your hand up, you're in good company. Because theologians and scholars and students have for centuries been debating and discussing what exactly was meant, what exactly happened at the Transfiguration and why it happened. And it's like some weird biblical word problem. It's 3 disciples plus 1 teacher plus 2 dead guys equals what? If you add in the dazzling white clothes, which, honestly sounds like an OxyClean ad or something, and the pronouncement from the sky, you still have this mystery. What does it all mean? And there's lots of theories. Because some theologians think that maybe it's a misremembered, kind of garbled retelling of the baptism story. Because it has the voice of God coming from the sky. And some think that it's a mangled version of the resurrection story. That Moses and Elijah kind of take the place of the 2 angels that are seen in some of the accounts. But the simpler approach to take, though, is that it really is just a straight account of an actual event. A miraculous event, but still an actual event, and it was something that Mark related more or less as it happened. And I say it's more or less as it happened because you're depending upon eyewitness accounts. When you read about the Transfiguration, and eyewitness accounts can sometimes be a little chancy. Brian Williams knows this. But the 3 synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all agree on the main points. And that you would expect that because Matthew and Luke are probably based in large part on the Gospel of Mark, plus other source material. But because all 3 of the synoptic Gospels report it, and John makes kind of an oblique reference to it in his Gospel, and there are some other non-canonical sources that refer to the Transfiguration as well, we know that it was significant. We know that it was important. But why? Jesus goes to a mountaintop with his 3 key disciples, and something happens there. Why was it important to us? Why should we be studying it 2,000 years later? To find the answer. To figure out what happened and why. The easiest way is probably to deconstruct what happened. Deconstruct the event and break it down into its basic elements. So first, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John to a high mountain. This is a signal that something significant is about to happen, because the high mountain in biblical literature signifies a spiritual apartness from daily life. High mountains are frequently the place where God and man interact in biblical accounts. So this is a marker that's being given to us. They go to a high mountain, something's going to happen. Something important. And then Jesus is transfigured before their eyes. His appearance changes, and Mark tells us that his clothes become dazzling white. Luke and Matthew, in their accounts, take it a little step further, and they add that the face of Jesus itself shone like the sun. And that's an interesting clue, because if you remember the stories from Exodus, when Moses encountered God on Sinai and afterward, the face of Moses also took on this curious kind of inhuman glow. So much so that thereafter he had to wear a veil when he was interacting with people just to keep from speaking him out. So the fact that Jesus' face glowed in two of these accounts at least signifies that he has just had this close encounter of the divine kind. And it recalls the experience of Moses. It sort of calls back to Moses and also looks ahead to the next thing that's going to happen. And there's something else about that word, that transfiguration, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. But the next thing that happens is all of a sudden Jesus is standing there next to Moses and Elijah, talking to them. Luke adds detail that they were talking about his upcoming mission to Jerusalem, which kind of makes it sound like it's a final briefing. Luke was probably the last gospel written. So it might be that he was just adding some details there that made sense to him. And then Peter, who is overwhelmed and just stunned beyond belief and has no idea what to say, still speaks. And we all know people like that. We all know people that don't know what to say but still speak anyway. And Peter says, Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let's build 3 dwellings, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. The word that Peter uses is scheme. It means a temporary dwelling or a tent or a booth. And it's not as off-point as it sounds, because in that culture they have a history of putting these booths up, these temporary dwellings to mark important events, just the same way we put up historical markers. In this case, Peter's idea seems to be that he wants to make it possible for the principals in this case, Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, to remain there on the mountain as long as they want. Then Peter is saved from saying anything else by that voice. The voice that comes from the sky. It's the voice that Adam and Eve heard in the garden. And it's the voice that Moses and the escaping Hebrews heard out in the wilderness of Sinai. It's the voice that Jesus heard when he was baptized. And it said, "This is my Son, my beloved. Listen to him." And all of a sudden it's over. All of a sudden it's over and everything seems to be back to normal, and it's one of those events that seems both simple and complex all at the same time. So that's what happened. Now you go back to the beginning and you look. The appearance of Moses and Elijah. What did that mean? Why were they there? It was important because Moses was the giver of the law, and Elijah was considered to be the greatest prophet in the eyes of the Jewish people. So by joining Jesus on the mountaintop, they were a way of saying that Jesus represented both the law and the prophets. It was a way to say, here is Jesus with Moses and Elijah, with the law and the prophets, and he is summing them all up in one person. Moses also, in some ways at least, marked the beginning of the Jewish people as a nation, as a united, unified people who were melded together by the experience of the Exodus and formed on the anvil of the law. So Moses marks the beginning, and Elijah, in Jewish culture, was what they call an eschatological figure. Just like a $5 word meaning that his was a figure that would come at the end of the age. So if you look at it that way, you have Moses and Elijah, the beginning and the end of the age. Together with Jesus, signified that Jesus was the vehicle that would move from the promise of nationhood to the fulfillment of their destiny. Similarly, the voice of God did more than just say, "This is my son, pay attention to him." Because it was a marker, it was a callback to the voice that Jesus heard when he was baptized at the beginning of his ministry. This time, voice marked the end of that middle phase of the ministry and the beginning of the end, which would come in Jerusalem. And the next time that God spoke, it would not be in the voice of a proud father, but in the raw power of an earthquake, while Jesus hung on the cross on Golgotha. So we see the importance of that. But what was this transfiguration itself? The Greek word, you know I love going back to the original Greek language. The Greek word that we translate as transfiguration is metamorpho, which is not easy to say. And it's a combination of the word meta, which means to change, and morpho, which means to change form so that you are reflecting an inner reality. So with that in mind, what you know then is the transfiguration was a moment, it was a window in time when the disciples were able to catch a true glimpse of the divine nature of Jesus Christ. It was a moment when the outer transformation seemed to be in keeping with the inner reality. And up until this moment, the divinity of Jesus had been a matter of inference for his disciples. They had inferred it based on his teachings and his signs and wonders, but on that mountaintop, on that day, they saw the real, or at least the other aspect of Jesus, the divine aspect. Made them realize, certainly, that Jesus was both man and God. So for them, this moment was a wake-up call. It was a starting pistol. It was the white flag of racing which says that Jesus is now starting the final lap of his ministry on earth. And it was God's way of saying before the final miracle of the resurrection, it was God's way of saying you're not just dealing with a wise man or a good man. You're not even just dealing with a prophet, but you are dealing with the Son of God. 2,000 years later, as we look back, what does the story hold for us? It's not really just the facts of the Transfiguration themselves, because they tell us stuff that we already know, that we already learned in Sunday school, in confirmation class, or in church. We know that Jesus is the Son of God. We know that he's the fulfillment of the law and of the prophets. I think the single most informative moment of this event comes when Peter says, "Let's build 3 dwellings here." It shows that he misses the point entirely. Because what Peter was saying, even if he didn't know it consciously, even if he didn't think it through, which he didn't, Peter was saying, we have just had this divine experience. We have witnessed a miracle. We have witnessed the Son of God. So let's build something so we can keep it here on the mountaintop. And that can be pretty tempting. It can be pretty tempting for us humans to say, I just had a life-transforming experience. I had a divine vision. Tell me how I can control it. I just experienced God. Now tell me how I can confine it so it doesn't overflow into the rest of my life. It's tempting. It's tempting to say, I have been saved. Now how do I keep that experience here in church? Not let it get in the way of how I live my life outside of these walls. That happens all too often. Master, let us build a dwelling place where we can keep an eye on you, keep you separate from the world. It's very tempting, but the answer, the punctuation at the end of the message of the Transfiguration is not found in the passage that we heard today from Mark. I cheated, I went to Matthew. Because in Matthew, when everything is done, everything has happened, and the disciples are still standing there on that mountaintop with Jesus, and they're giving him the fish mouth, totally flabbergasted, not knowing what to say. Jesus comes over to them, Matthew says. Jesus comes over to them and touches them and says, "Get up. Don't be afraid." As we look forward and prepare for Lent, as we prepare for those somber days when we recollect the fate of Jesus at the hands of humanity, the message rings true for us. Get up. Don't be afraid. You have a Savior. You have a Savior in Jesus Christ. Get up. Don't be afraid. We are blessed to know the truth about Jesus. We are blessed to hear his words and to know what he's taught us. And the trick is not to be afraid to take those words and put them into action instead of segregating them as something that we should read and hear, not necessarily do. Get up and do not be afraid, Jesus said. Because he knew that there was a world waiting for his disciples. Just as there is a world waiting for us today to go out and spread the good news of Jesus Christ. So the message of the Transfiguration in some ways is a question. What can we do? What can we do as individuals and as a church? What can we accomplish in the name of Jesus Christ, the Savior, the Son of God? What can we accomplish if we only have the courage not to hide him on the mountain and to keep him within these walls?